Hey everybody, it's Jason with Parallel Reality coming back with you here today with an article from Red State dated September 1st, 2023. And before I go over what you're looking at on your screen now, if you're looking at your screen, is how many times in just the last few years have you seen leftists throw out a story that everyone just assumes is true right off the bat, and then it turns out, oh, that thing didn't actually happen, like the whole Russiagate thing that went on for years, and there's many other examples, and we have another one today from our neighbors to the north. And the article is titled Canada's Churches Burned Over an Indigenous Genocide. New excavation results tell a far different story. Basically, it didn't happen. So, of course, we know that. So, I don't know if you guys heard that like a few years ago, uh, there was a finding, it's apparently on some church somewhere in Canada that they found supposedly like 200 bodies of indigenous children. And they, of course, everyone blamed the church right away. And then a whole number of churches burned in Canada. And it turns out, oh, wait, that's not actually what happened at all. So let's get into it here. It says 2 years ago, stories of mass graves in Canada began to circulate, being shared by everyone from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to the Pope. The anomalies, as they were called, were picked up by a ground penetrating radar and presented as proof that the Catholic Church had committed tens of thousands of secret murders and burials of Indigenous children at residential schools. And gee, I wonder if that happened or not. Says, for example, in May 2021, a claim was made that over 200 Indigenous children had been murdered and buried in a mass grave. They were aptly dubbed the missing. And this is what I was referring to before I got into the article. Says, we had a knowing in our community that we were able to verify. To our knowledge, these missing children are undocumented deaths. Roseanne Casimir, chief of the, I cannot pronounce that, and I'm not even going to try, chief of, I'm just going to say this tribe here, said in a statement on May 27th of 2021. So they just went, oh, wait, we found these bodies. We just assumed that they were genocided, so that must be correct. So good job there. After the announcement, Canada's government decried the claimed discovery, pledging millions of dollars in reparations while seeking to shut down anyone who questioned the narrative, of course, because it's Canada. And keep in mind, that's coming to the United States. They're trying to get it here. So it's because the Catholic Church had run the residential schools in the 19th and 20th centuries. The Pope also put out a statement alleging a genocide had occurred. So I love all this. It's just we think a thing happened, so it must have happened. There's no scientific inquiry behind it. There's no like let's wait and see if that's what actually happened. It's just nope. We found this. This must be what it is. The end. We're done because everybody has to. Uh, it's all grievance politics at this point. It's all victimhood crap. There's no, let's just wait and find out. And of course, when the wait and find out happens, it always turns out, like always, turns out that what really happened isn't what everyone was saying happened. Because of course it wasn't. So the article goes on, says, to be sure, the story didn't seem out of bounds at the time it emerged, and certainly Canada didn't treat the Indigenous people of the planet well. That is actually true. Says there's no reason to believe abuse didn't occur at some residential schools given the time frame and historical precedent. Don't have a problem with that. Says, I mean, with the article saying that, if that is. So still, it's a far different thing to charge the secret murder of tens of thousands of children, including 215 being placed in a single mass grave. In fact, the broader allegation is that there are thousands of unmarked graves beneath residential school sites scattered across the Canadian countryside. Yeah, I remember hearing that too, that they found it in the one place and they're like, oh no, it must actually be everywhere. So it says there that's the kind of thing that leads people to seek retribution, and sure enough, that's what happened, of course. It says in the 2 months following the reports of the supposed mass graves, no less than 68 different churches were burned or vandalized in Canada, with even political and Indigenous leaders speculating it was in response to the announcement made in May. And it probably was. I mean, like, if there weren't really any before then, and then they announced this thing that says, oh, the church did it, then 68 churches get vandalized or burned. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say it was because of the announcement. I don't really think we have to think much further than that. So it says to this day, Christians are harassed as deniers or are forced to resign their positions if they even question the narrative around the claimed genocide. Because the evidence does not support the overall gruesome narrative put forward around the world for several years, a narrative for which verifiable evidence has been scarce or non existent. James C. McRae, a former attorney for Manitoba, wrote an essay published last year. McRae resigned from his position on a government panel in May after his views on residential schools outraged Indigenous groups and other activists and politicians. So he wrote something that turns out was actually true. He just said basically, we don't have any evidence to support this, and people got pissed, and this guy lost his job over it. So, gotta love the way things work these days. So it says now, years after the fact, we are learning that there's essentially no evidence that a genocide took place at all. Because of course there wasn't, because this is what leftists do. Remember, the rule about leftists is that they lie all the time about everything. That's all you need to know. Says excavations were performed at multiple sites over the summer where mass graves were alleged to have been detected, and those excavations have produced no human remains. Oh, funny how that works. So it says after 2 years of horror stories about the alleged mass graves of Indigenous children at residential schools across Canada, a series of recent excavations at suspected sites has turned up no human remains. Some academics and politicians say it's further evidence that the stories are unproven. And then someone with a name here again, I'm not going to pronounce that because I'm going to butcher the hell out of it. So this person that's not a person actually. I'm sorry, it's a group. So this group of Indigenous people, they're also known as the Pine Creek First Nation. See, that's a lot easier to pronounce. We'll go with that. They excavated 14 sites in the basement of Our Lady of Seven Sorrows Catholic Church near the Creek Residential School in Manitoba during 4 weeks this summer. The so-called anomalies were first detected using ground-penetrating radar, but on August 18th, Chief Derek Nepinak, the remote Pine Creek Indian Reserve, said no remains were found. Funny how that works again. So in response, some are calling what occurred a blood libel against Christians in the Catholic Church. Yeah, it's hard to see how that isn't. You guys basically like isn't this how like all rioting type stuff works? Is that there's a false narrative that gets out there, and then everybody decides to destroy things, and then it turns out, oh, the thing that everybody thought happened isn't what actually happened. I mean, see the Summer of Love, for instance. So the article continues, says, yet, despite the results of the excavations, the Canadian government and Indigenous tribes are still insisting that the mass graves exist, doubling down on slandering anyone who questions the narrative. So the scientific evidence says this thing didn't happen. And they're like, oh no, it totally did. What evidence do they have to support their ideas? Nothing. They just think it did, so it must have happened. Says again, that's not to say Native peoples in Canada were treated well. Obviously, there were great injustices that occurred. I didn't think anyone would suggest Indigenous tribes weren't abused in the centuries surrounding the settlement of Canada as a territory and country, and those injustices should be accounted for and acknowledged. Of course, I mean, yeah, if that happens, yeah, that's fine. So still, that is not an excuse to spread unproven tales of mass graves and genocide that have led to the burning of Christian churches and possibly worse. Government leaders, and yes, even Indigenous leaders, should not be throwing around allegations that allude to the Holocaust without evidence. It says to do so is supremely irresponsible, not responsible. It says to do so is supremely irresponsible and harmful. And yeah, and I've gone on record before saying that I don't like all the World War II comparisons because most of the time leftists can't seem to get the comparison right. And in this case, I'd say it's not right because we know nothing actually happened. I mean, that would be like, yeah, my people, the Jews, that is, coming out and being like, oh, yeah, there's all these camps where people were buried, and then people go to these camps and there's nobody there. And then we're like, no, it still happened, you know? I mean, it's ridiculous, but are the churches going to get an apology? Is the Pope going to write an apology? Of course, none of that's going to actually happen. So what do you guys think about this? I mean, do you think there should be an apology from Justin Trudeau and the Canadian government and even the Pope to the Catholic Church? Or do you think everything's just a-okay here and nothing should happen? Because, well, let's face it, nothing's going to happen. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon.